Hello! I'm trying something a little bit different today for math and how we're going to check our answers. So I'm going to make a video and actually solve today's math problems for you so you can kind of check and see how you did. So let's start with number 2. It says the students decided to create a tile arrangement with geometric shapes. 3/4 of the tiles will be triangles. So I'm going to represent what I have first. Remember, with fourths, I like to cut them in half and then cut my halves in half. And so I'm going to shade in 3/4. Now for number 2, I'm going to shade in stripe. And then for number 3, I'm going to stripe and stripe. So remember, I really want you to find what works best for you. That's what I love about math. We can all have different strategies and way of solving things. And as long as they're efficient, one way is really not better than the other. We just want you to make sense of what you're doing. So here I have 3/4 of the tiles. Then it says half of these triangle tiles, so half of them will be painted blue. So I'm going to take this, cut it in half, and then I am going to stripe half of those blue. Perfect. So what did I just do? I did half of 3/4. And then I can see that my answer here, my numerator is going to be how many pieces are shaded and striped. And so when I look right here, I have 3 pieces that are shaded, which means they are triangles, and striped, which means they are painted blue. So my numerator is going to be 3. And I'm going to double check that because we talked about our rule for multiplication is my numerator times my numerator. So 1 times 3 is going to equal the numerator in my answer. So 1 times 3 is 3. So I'm feeling good about that piece. And then my denominator is going to be how many pieces in all. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So my denominator is an 8. And then once again, I'm going to check those numbers. So what is 2 times 4? Well, 2 times 4 is 8. So the answer to number 2 was 3/8. Now, let's go to number 3. Number 3 says the art teacher asked the students to design a mural with their handprints. The students will cover 2/3 of the mural with handprints. Half of those handprint tiles will be painted red. What part of the mural will be red handprints? All right, so the first thing I'm going to represent is that 2/3. So I'm going to break it into thirds. And this is where this is a little bit different. I'm not going to shade. That's one way to do it. I'm going to stripe this one. So for me, I like to have a system and I like to have a routine. So for this, I always split my first fraction going down. And then when I stripe, I always stripe it like this. And make sure that your stripes are slanted. Okay. So there are my 2/3 that are handprints, and then it says half of those. So if I took this and I cut it in half, it said half of those will be red. So now I'm going to go, so I cut it this way, my second fraction, and now when I represent it, I'm going to do them all this way. And the reason I like to do that is because it is going to create this checkered pattern, which is going to help me see right here. These 2 pieces right here, they are red and they are yellow. So if you have, use those colors on Seesaw to really help you out, because it really helps me out when I'm doing this. Okay, so I have 1, 2. So let's look back. What did I do? I took half, I painted half of those handprints, so half of the handprints. How much of them were handprints? 2/3. Painted half of them red. Okay, so let's double check. So what is 1 times 2? Well, 1 times 2 is, oops, dropped my pen. 1 times 2 is 2. And then what is 2 times 3? 2 times 3 is 6. And I can see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces in all. So I feel good about that. The answer to number 2 is 2, 6. I do notice right away that 2, 6, both those numbers are even. So that can actually be simplified to 1/3. And 1/3 would be my final answer. I was making a big deal about the striping because a lot of times what I see 5th graders do, they'll cut it into thirds like this, and they don't slant their lines enough. So then when they're doing it, they're doing like this, and then they cut it in half, and then they're doing it like this. And then when you get done, sometimes it's kind of like, well, how many pieces were there? Because you do them too straight, and then it doesn't look like these really clear thirds. I mean, that could be a 1, 2, 3, and you end up miscounting. Okay, so I want to make sure we're clear on this. This is not what I want you doing. So I'll do the big old not sign on it. If you're going to use the 2 stripes, then really make sure that you are slanting them. Okay. Now, 2 and 3 are reviewing a fraction times a fraction, but when we go to number 4, get some mixed numbers up in here. And you're probably like, well, why did you give me a square still with mixed numbers? An array, we want you to see an array can be used in so many different ways. It can be used with whole numbers. It can be used with a fraction times a fraction. It can be used with a mixed number times a whole number. And then starting next week, we're going to look at how we can use an array to do a mixed number times a mixed number. The procedure is the same. It just is going to look a little bit different depending on your numbers, right? So for this one, here, a large mural made up of handprints tiles will go on the left wall. The mural will measure 2 feet, so it's 2 feet by 1 1/3 feet. Okay, so I'm going to put my colored pencils away because we really don't need colors right now. You're always welcome to use them, but I'll show you how I'm going to do this one. I'm going to write my whole number here, 2, and then think like when we have 23, we break apart our 10s and our 1s. When we have a mixed number, we break apart our whole number and our fraction. So we would cut it kind of like this, and then we'd say 1 and 1/3. That helps me see. Oh man, I can't do it. I got to get the colored pencils back in here. Nice. So this would be 2, and I'm going to do 2 times 1. Then I'm going to do 2 times 1/3. And when I have a whole number times a fraction, I like to put my whole number first. And then in my head, I just say, okay, I have 2 groups of 1/3. So that would be 1/3 and 1/3, which would be 2/3. And then 2 times 1 is 2. And then we know with an array with like whole numbers, we've broken that answer apart. So to get that final answer, we've got to put it back together. So I'm going to add these 2 pieces. So 2 plus 2 2 plus 2/3 equals 2 and 2/3. And I always tell my students to circle their answer. It's like you're serving it to me on a silver platter. And then that way when I go back through to check your work, it's like, oh, just sitting there waiting on me. Okay? So that was problem number 4. Now let's look at problem number 5. Same thing. We got a mixed number times a whole number. The door of the art room measures 4.5 feet. Oops, I messed up. I'm just going to scribble that out. 4.5 feet times 2 feet. Okay. Remember, mistakes help us grow. I got to be a little careful with my numbers. So let's see. Put my whole number here. 2. Now I'm going to break this apart. I'll have 4.5. So here I've got 2 times 4, and then 2 times a half. So 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times a half, or 2 groups of a half, would be 1. And so 8 plus 1 would be, this would be 9. All right. And finally, number 6. A small area above a window is available for a tiling design. The space measures 4 inches by 1.5. How large is the area above the window? So like I said, I like routines and I like procedures. I like to put the whole number here first. But remember, with the array, you don't have to. You could put the 4 up here and then break this side into 1.5. The idea with the array, it helps you keep track of your pieces. Okay? I would still start with my whole number and I'm multiplying, though. Do my purple. Do 4 times 1, and then 4 times a half. So 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times a half, or 4 groups of 1/2, would be 4 halves. We see that's an improper fraction, so 4 halves would be equal to 2. And then 4 plus 2 equals 6. And so 6 is our final answer. So today, we went over how to multiply a whole number times a mixed number using the array. And then we also looked at shading and striping, or striping and striping. We've been working on this for a couple days now. So I want you to start to decide, what is my favorite way of solving these problems when I multiply these and I'm doing the representations. Okay? Hopefully this video helped you. If you've been kind of struggling on this math at home, I want to start making more of these videos just to kind of review the math for you if you're feeling confused about the answers. Have a wonderful Thursday.